My name is Victoria Ashworth, and tonight I am supposed to become Mrs. Augustus Pemberton III. But instead I am writing these words by the light of a single candle in what may be my final hours at Rosewood Plantation. Tomorrow evening I will either be married to a man I despise or I will have vanished forever with the only person I have ever truly loved. The wedding dress hanging in my armoire is a masterpiece of French silk and Belgian lace worth more than most people see in a lifetime. Commissioned by my mother to showcase our family's wealth and refinement to the Northern industrial elite who will witness my transformation from Southern belle to millionaire's wife, Victoria. Darling, my mother had said when the dress arrived. From Richmond, you look absolutely radiant. Augustus will be so pleased with his bride. As if I were a prize to be awarded rather than a person with feelings and desires of my own. The entire wedding had been planned around the convenience and preferences of men who saw my marriage as a business merger rather than a union of hearts. Augustus Pemberton III owned steel mills in Pennsylvania and textile factories in Massachusetts. His fortune built on the labor of immigrant workers who earned in a year what he spent on a single dinner party. He was 42 years old with pale gray eyes and soft hands that had never known real work. Miss Ashworth will bring grace and breeding to our family, he had told my father during their first meeting. While our family will provide her with the security and luxury that a woman of her station deserves, security and luxury in exchange for grace and breeding. The transaction was as cold and calculated as any business deal conducted in his factories. There was no mention of love or compatibility, or any of the things that should matter when two people pledged their lives to each other. I had been raised to understand that my primary value lay in my ability to make an advantageous marriage. My education consisted of accomplishments designed to make me attractive to wealthy suitors rather than skills that might allow me to support myself. French and piano and watercolors, dancing and embroidery and the art of managing servants, everything calculated to create the perfect ornamental wife for a man who valued beauty and status over intelligence or character. But despite my carefully controlled upbringing, I had fallen in love with someone my family would consider completely inappropriate. Someone whose very existence challenged everything my parents believed about social hierarchy and racial superiority. Marcus had been part of our household for 8 years, purchased as a teenager to serve as our family's personal coachman, but his intelligence and dignity had set him apart from the beginning, making it impossible to see him as simply property. Miss Victoria, he would say when helping me into the carriage, his voice respectful but his eyes holding depths that suggested he saw me as more than just another privileged white girl. Thank you, Marcus, I would reply, treasuring the brief moments when our hands might touch as he assisted me. The electric connection that passed between us despite the vast social gulf that was supposed to separate us. Our first real conversation had occurred 3 years ago, when a sudden storm forced us to take shelter in an abandoned cabin during one of my afternoon drives. What began as polite discussion about the weather had evolved into something much deeper and more dangerous, you read. I had observed, seeing him examine a book left behind by previous occupants. Yes, miss, Marcus had replied carefully. My grandmother taught me before she died. Said knowledge was the only thing that couldn't be taken away. What kind of books do you prefer? Poetry. Mostly, Marcus had admitted. Something about the way words can capture feelings and make them beautiful, even when the feelings themselves are painful. Poetry, beauty, the transformation of pain into art. Here was a man who thought about life in ways that my suitors never did, who saw meaning and purpose beyond the accumulation of wealth and status. That conversation had led to others, carefully arranged during our drives when we could speak privately without arousing suspicion. I found myself looking forward to these excursions not for their destinations but for the chance to talk with someone who challenged my thinking and touched my heart. Sometimes I wonder what it would be like, I had said during one of these conversations, to choose my own path instead of following the one laid out for me. What would you choose? Marcus had asked. If you could choose anything, I would choose to matter, I had replied without hesitation. To do something meaningful with my life instead of just being decorative? You already matter, Marcus had said quietly. More than you know. The intensity in his voice had made my breath catch. There was something in the way he looked at me that suggested his feelings went far beyond appropriate boundaries. Something that matched the growing attraction I felt for him. Marcus? I had whispered, "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that you're the most remarkable woman I've ever known," he had replied. "Intelligent and kind and beautiful in ways that have nothing to do with your appearance." "You can't say such things," I had protested, though my heart was singing with joy at his words. "I know I can't." Marcus had agreed, "But I also can't pretend that what I feel for you is anything less than love." Love, the word that changed everything between us. The acknowledgement of feelings that society said were impossible, but that felt more real than anything else in my carefully constructed world. From that moment we had been living a double life, maintaining the facade of mistress and servant while nurturing a relationship that grew deeper and more precious with each passing day. "I love you too," I had whispered during our next private moment. "I love your mind and your heart and your courage in maintaining your dignity despite impossible circumstances." "Then we're both lost," Marcus had said with a sad smile, "because there's no future for people like us in a world like this." "Maybe not in this world," I had replied, "but perhaps we could find a different world. A place where love matters more than law. A different world, the dream that had sustained us through 2 years of secret meetings and whispered conversations. The hope that somewhere beyond the boundaries of Virginia there might be places where our love could exist openly, but reality had intruded in the form of Augustus Pemberton III and his marriage proposal, my parents' enthusiastic acceptance, and the elaborate wedding planned for tomorrow evening that would seal my fate and separate me forever from the man I loved. "Victoria," my father had announced after accepting Augustus's proposal, "you are about to become one of the wealthiest women in America. This marriage will secure our family's position for generations." "But what about my feelings?" I had protested weakly. "What about compatibility and affection? Feelings are luxuries that women of your station cannot afford." My mother had replied sharply, "Love is for novels and fairy tales. Marriage is about alliance and advantage, alliance and advantage." The cold calculation that reduced my life to a business transaction, the complete dismissal of my right to choose my own happiness. "Besides," my father had added, "Augustus is quite taken with you. He's already planning to buy you a house in Newport and another in New York. You'll want for nothing, nothing except love, nothing except respect. Nothing except the basic human dignity of being valued for who I was rather than what I represented." That night, I had met Marcus in the stables where we could speak privately about our impossible situation. The reality that my engagement meant the end of our secret relationship. "There has to be something we can do," I had said desperately. "Some way to be together despite everything working against us." "Like what?" Marcus had asked. "Where could we go that would accept a white woman and her black lover? What kind of life could we have together?" "I don't care what kind of life," I had replied, "as long as it's a life we choose together instead of lives imposed on us by other people. You don't understand what you'd be giving up," Marcus had protested. "Your family, your fortune, your entire social position, everything you've ever known. I'd be giving up things that were never really mine." I had corrected. "My family sees me as property to be traded. My fortune depends on enslaving people like you. My social position is built on lies and cruelty. And what would you gain?" "You," I had said simply. "I'd gain the chance to love you openly, to build a life based on truth instead of pretense, to become the person I was meant to be instead of the ornament I was trained to be." "It would be dangerous," Marcus had warned. "Running away together would make us both fugitives. We'd be hunted by slave catchers and bounty hunters. Then we'd better make sure we aren't caught." I had replied with more confidence than I felt. That conversation had planted the seed of the plan that now consumed my thoughts. The possibility of disappearing on my wedding night while everyone was distracted by the celebration. Vanishing with Marcus into a world where we could finally be honest about our feelings. Tomorrow night, I had told him during our last meeting. During the reception when everyone is drinking and dancing. "We'll have our chance, asterisk." "Are you certain about this?" Marcus had asked. "Once we run, there's no going back. You'll never again be Victoria Ashworth of Rosewood Plantation." "Good," I had replied without hesitation. Victoria Ashworth is a prison. I've been trapped in my whole life. I want to become someone new. Someone free to choose love over duty. Now, sitting in my childhood bedroom on the eve of my wedding, I felt the weight of that choice pressing down on me like a physical thing. In 12 hours, I would either be married to Augustus Pemberton or I would be a fugitive with the man I loved. The risks were enormous, the chances of success uncertain. But the alternative was spending the rest of my life wondering what might have been if I had been brave enough to choose happiness over security tomorrow evening. While the guests toasted my marriage to a millionaire, I would vanish into the night with my slave, proving that love really could triumph over every barrier that society tried to place between human hearts. The pampered Southern belle was about to disappear forever, replaced by a woman courageous enough to fight for the life she wanted, rather than accept the life she was given. The morning of my wedding dawned clear and cold, with a December wind that rattled the windows of rosewood and seemed to echo the turmoil in my heart. I woke before the servants began their morning tasks and lay in bed listening to the sounds of preparation that would culminate in my public sacrifice to Augustus Pemberton's ambitions. Miss Victoria, called Sarah, my personal maid, as she entered. With my morning coffee. Your mama wants to see you in her sitting room as soon as you're dressed. Thank you, Sarah, I replied, though the thought of facing my mother's excited chatter about wedding details made my stomach turn with dread. The conversation I had been dreading unfolded exactly as I had expected, my mother reviewing every aspect of the day's schedule while I nodded and smiled and played the role of the eager bride. The ceremony begins at 6 o'clock, she announced, checking her elaborate notes, followed immediately by the reception in the ballroom. Augustus has arranged for champagne from France and an orchestra from Richmond. How thoughtful of him, I murmured, wondering if she could hear the sarcasm in my voice. You must remember to smile constantly. My mother continued, everyone will be watching you, judging whether our family has raised you properly. First impressions are crucial when dealing with Northern society. As if I were some exotic specimen being displayed for their entertainment, rather than a person entering into the most important relationship of my life. And after the reception, my mother added with a meaningful look, Augustus will escort you to the bridal suite that's been prepared in the East Wing, the bridal suite, where I was expected to submit to the physical demands of a man I found repulsive, where my body would become his property just as legally as Marcus's body belonged to my mother, I said carefully. Have you ever wondered whether happiness might be more important than social advantage? Happiness? My mother repeated with a laugh. What a romantic notion, dear. Happiness is what women convince themselves they want when they don't understand the realities of life. But surely love should play some role in marriage. Love grows from respect and gratitude. My mother replied firmly. You will learn to love Augustus when you see how well he provides for you. When you appreciate the security and status he offers, security and status in exchange for my freedom, respect and gratitude instead of passion and choice. The transaction seemed more sordid with each discussion. The afternoon brought a parade of visitors, wealthy neighbors and family friends who came to admire my wedding dress and offer advice about married life. Their conversation revealed how completely they accepted the commodification of women in the name of social stability. Augustus is such a catch, gushed Mrs. Pembroke from the neighboring plantation. You're so fortunate to have attracted such a wealthy and distinguished gentleman. Indeed, agreed Miss Caroline Whitmore. Most girls your age would give anything for such an opportunity. Give anything, including their autonomy, their right to choose, their chance for genuine love. The price seemed too high no matter how wealthy the purchaser. Have you met his business associates? Asked Mrs. Pembroke. I understand they're very influential in Northern politics. A few, I replied vaguely. They seem quite ambitious. Ambitious men make the best husbands, declared Miss Whitmore. They provide well for their families and command respect in society. Command respect through wealth and power rather than earning it. Through character and compassion. The values that define my world felt increasingly hollow as the day progressed. The dress fitting consumed most of the late afternoon. Seamstresses making final adjustments while I stood like a mannequin being prepared for display. The elaborate Gown was undeniably beautiful, but it felt like a costume for a play I didn't want to perform. You look magnificent. Miss, said the head seamstress, like a princess from a fairy tale, a princess being sacrificed to secure her father's kingdom. The fairy tale analogy was more accurate than she realized. As evening approached and guests began arriving for the ceremony, I found myself looking out my bedroom window toward the stables where Marcus was preparing the carriages that would transport the wedding party. Even from a distance I could see the careful precision with which he worked, the dignity he maintained despite his circumstances. Miss Victoria, called Sarah from the doorway. It's time to come downstairs. Your father is waiting to escort you to the ceremony, time to begin the performance that would either end with my marriage to Augustus or my escape with Marcus. I took one last look around the bedroom where I had spent my childhood memorizing details I might never see again. Parlor where the ceremony was to take place had been transformed into something resembling a cathedral, with white roses and silk ribbons creating an atmosphere of romantic elegance that mocked the commercial nature of what was actually taking place. Augustus stood at the improvised altar wearing an expensive black suit that emphasized his pale complexion and soft features. Beside him waited the minister who would perform the ceremony that would legally transfer ownership of my person from my father to my husband, dearly beloved. The minister began as I took my place beside Augustus. We are gathered here today to witness the union of Augustus Pemberton III and Victoria Ashworth in holy matrimony. Holy matrimony. The sacred language disguising a profane transaction. The religious blessing invoked to sanctify what was essentially a business merger. Marriage is an honorable estate, the minister continued, instituted by God for the mutual society, help, and comfort that one ought to have of the other, mutual society and comfort. Ideals that sounded beautiful in theory but had no relationship to the reality of my arranged marriage. Augustus had never shown the slightest interest in my comfort or sought my society beyond what was necessary for appearances. If any man can show just cause why these two may not lawfully be joined together, the minister intoned, let him now speak, or else hereafter forever hold his peace. Just cause. I had dozens of reasons why this marriage should not proceed, but none that would be considered valid by the assembled guests who saw my personal happiness as irrelevant compared to family alliances and social connections. Augustus, the minister addressed my intended husband. Will you have this woman to be your wedded wife? To live together after God's ordinance in the holy estate of matrimony? Will you love her, comfort her, honor and keep her in sickness and in health? And forsaking all others, keep yourself only unto her. So long as you both shall live, I will. Augustus replied with the confidence of someone who had never doubted his right to possess whatever he desired. Victoria. The minister turned to me. Will you have this man to be your wedded husband? To live together after God's ordinance in the holy estate of matrimony? Will you obey him and serve him, love, honor, and keep him, in sickness and in health, and forsaking all others? Keep yourself only unto him, so long as you both shall live. The moment of choice had arrived. The words that would either bind me to Augustus forever, or mark the beginning of my rebellion against everything this ceremony represented. I began, then stopped, looking out at the sea of expectant faces, the wealthy and powerful people who had gathered to witness my surrender to their social system in the back of the room, barely visible among the servants who had been allowed to observe the ceremony. I caught sight of Marcus, his eyes meeting mine across the space that separated our different worlds. I said more firmly. I need a moment, Miss Ashworth. The minister said with confusion. Is everything all right? No, I replied, surprising myself with the clarity of my voice. Everything is not all right, and I cannot proceed with this ceremony. A murmur of shock rippled through the assembled guests as I stepped back from the altar, lifting my skirts to avoid tripping on the elaborate train. Victoria. My father hissed. What are you doing? I'm choosing my own life, I replied, moving toward the door with growing confidence. Instead of accepting the life you've chosen for me, you cannot simply leave. Augustus protested, his face flushed with embarrassment and anger. We have a contract. Legal obligations. You have a contract with my father. I corrected, not with me. I never agreed to be sold like livestock to the highest bidder. The room erupted in chaos as I reached the door. Voices raised in outrage and confusion, my mother's wails mixing with my father's curses and Augustus's demands for explanation. But I was no longer listening to any of them. I was running through the house toward the servants' quarters where Marcus would be waiting. My elaborate wedding dress making every step difficult but not impossible, Miss Victoria, Marcus said in amazement as I burst into the stable. What are you doing here? Shouldn't you be at your wedding? I am at my wedding, I replied breathlessly. This is my wedding. Choosing you instead of him, choosing love instead of duty. Are you certain? Marcus asked, though he was already moving toward the saddled horses he had prepared according to our plan. Once we leave together, there's no undoing what happens next. I've never been more certain of anything, I said, accepting his help in mounting the horse despite my cumbersome dress. Let's go find that different world we talked about. As we rode away from Rosewood Plantation into the December night, I could hear the commotion behind us, voices calling my name. The sound of pursuit beginning to organize, but ahead of us lay freedom, uncertainty, and the chance to discover what kind of life we could build together when love was allowed to triumph over law. The mistress who had been paraded at the altar to wed a millionaire was gone forever, vanished into the night with her slave toward whatever future they could create together. The masquerade was over, and the real story of Victoria and Marcus was just beginning. The first hours of our escape passed in a blur of moonlit roads and pounding hooves, Marcus leading us through back paths and forgotten trails that avoided the main routes where pursuit was most likely. My wedding dress billowing behind me like a white flag of surrender to my old life. We need to reach the river crossing before dawn, Marcus called over the sound of our horses' breathing. Once we're across, it will be harder for them to track us, the river crossing, where we would abandon our horses and continue on foot through terrain that favored fugitives over mounted pursuers, the plan we had developed during weeks of whispered conversations and stolen moments. How far? I asked, already feeling the strain of riding in formal attire never designed for such activity. 5 miles. Marcus replied, Can you make it? I can make anything, I said with determination, as long as it leads away from that wedding and toward a life with you. The December air was sharp against my face, cutting through the elaborate silk and lace that had been chosen to impress Augustus's business associates, transforming my wedding finery into the costume of a fugitive behind us. The lights of Rosewood grew dimmer with each mile, but I knew that pursuit was inevitable. My father would organize search parties as soon as he recovered from the shock of my public rebellion, while Augustus would demand the return of his stolen bride. They'll send riders in every direction, I said as we paused to rest our horses beside a frozen creek. How can we stay ahead of them? By going where they don't expect, Marcus replied. Everyone will assume we're heading north toward the Free States, but we're going south first, then west into the mountains, south toward the heart of slave territory, where a white woman traveling with a black man would face immediate suspicion and danger, but also where no one would think to look for runaways heading in the wrong direction. The mountains. There are communities in the Appalachians, Marcus explained, people who don't ask too many questions about each other's past. Places where we could hide until the immediate search dies down, hide until we could plan our next move, until we could find passage to somewhere our love might be accepted rather than criminalized. The immediate goal was simply to survive the first few days when pursuit would be most intense. The sound of dogs barking in the distance made us both freeze with terror. Bloodhounds could follow our trail even if human trackers lost it, their keen noses capable of distinguishing our scent from all the other smells of the winter night. This way, Marcus said urgently, leading us into the creek itself where the flowing water would break our scent trail, the icy current soaking through my silk slippers and making my teeth chatter. We followed the creek for over a mile, our horses struggling to maintain footing on the slippery stones while water swirled around their legs, but finally Marcus guided us onto the far bank where rocky ground would leave fewer tracks. We should change clothes, Marcus said as we reached an abandoned cabin that offered temporary shelter. Your wedding dress makes you visible for miles. Change clothes. Transform myself from pampered southern belle into someone who could travel inconspicuously through a hostile countryside. I had brought a simple traveling dress in my saddlebags, but the symbolic significance of removing my wedding gown felt profound. Turnaround, I said, beginning to unlace the elaborate bodice that had taken 3 servants to fasten that morning. Victoria, Marcus said softly. Are you sure about this, really sure? Because once you take off that dress, you can never put it back on, never? Go back to being the person you were. That person was never real, I replied, stepping out of the silk and lace that represented everything I was rejecting. She was just a performance. A character I played to please other people. The simple wool dress I changed into was warm and practical, designed for traveling rather than displaying wealth. It felt like putting on my true identity for the first time in my life. Better, Marcus said when I emerged from behind the cabin's partition. You look like someone who belongs in the world instead of someone who's just visiting it. Someone who belongs in the world. The phrase captured something essential about what I was choosing. Abandoning the artificial elevation of privilege for the authentic experience of being human, we rode through the night, following routes that Marcus had learned during his years of service. Paths used by hunters and trappers who moved through the countryside without drawing attention. By dawn, we had covered nearly 30 miles and were well beyond the immediate search area. There, Marcus pointed to a farmhouse nestled in a valley between 2 hills. That's where we can rest and get news about whether pursuit is close behind us. The farmhouse belonged to a family named Johnson. Poor whites who scratched out a living on marginal land with the help of 2 elderly slaves they treated more like family members than property. Their isolation and circumstances made them natural allies for people seeking to disappear. We're looking for work, Marcus explained to the farmer who answered our knock. Traveling south looking for employment. Wondering if you might have need of extra hands. Always need help during winter. The farmer replied, studying us with curious but not suspicious eyes. You folks married? Yes, sir, I said quickly. Recently wed, looking to start fresh somewhere. New, recently wed, the lie felt more honest than the truth about my abandoned wedding to Augustus. This simple deception acknowledged the real relationship between Marcus and me rather than the artificial one that society had tried to impose. You can stay in the barn, the farmer's wife offered, meals with the family if you work for your keep. We don't have much, but we share what we have. The simple generosity of people who understood hardship personally rather than observing it from a distance. Their kindness reminded me that goodness existed in unexpected places. The 3 days we spent at the Johnson farm were the first peaceful moments since our escape, working alongside people who accepted us without question, sleeping together in the barn loft like the married couple we claimed to be. You're different from most folks who pass through, Mrs. Johnson observed as I helped her with laundry. Educated, well-spoken. You come from money originally. A little, I admitted carefully. But money doesn't always bring happiness. No, indeed, she agreed. Some of the most miserable people I've known had more wealth than they could spend, while some of the happiest had barely enough to survive. Happiness that came from living authentically rather than performing roles assigned by others. The Johnson family's contentment despite their poverty stood in sharp contrast to the gilded misery I had observed among the wealthy planters of my childhood. Your husband seems like a good man, Mrs. Johnson continued, respectful, hard-working. Treats you like an equal rather than property. Treats me like an equal. The phrase revealed how rare such relationships were, even among free couples who chose each other. The assumption that husbands owned wives was so universal that Marcus's courtesy seemed remarkable. He is a good man. I agreed. The best I've ever known. Hold on to that, Mrs. Johnson advised. Good men are rarer than honest politicians and more valuable than all the gold in California. On our 4th morning, Mr. Johnson brought news that chilled my blood. Riders had been through the area asking about a missing white woman and her companion, offering substantial rewards for information leading to their capture. They described you pretty accurately, he said with concern, including that fancy dress you were wearing when you arrived. We should leave immediately, Marcus said, before they circle back or send more searchers. Where will you go? Mrs. Johnson asked. West, I replied, toward the mountains. Looking for a place where we can disappear completely. Be careful, she warned. Mountain folk can be suspicious of strangers, but they also value privacy and tend to mind their own business. Asterisk, she provided us with supplies and directions to communities where we might find acceptance. Her parting words carrying the weight of genuine concern. Love like yours is rare, she said as we prepared to leave. Worth protecting no matter what it costs, worth protecting no matter what it costs. The validation of our choice to risk everything for the chance to be together, recognition from someone who understood that authentic love was more valuable than social approval. As we rode west toward the Blue Ridge Mountains, I reflected on how completely my life had changed in less than a week, from pampered plantation mistress to fugitive traveling under an assumed name. From virginal bride-to-be to woman sharing intimate moments with her chosen partner. Do you regret it? Marcus asked as we made camp in a hidden valley. Giving up everything you've ever known for this uncertain life? I regret nothing, I replied. Honestly, except waiting so long to choose honesty over pretense. Even if we're caught, even then, I said firmly, because we'll have had these days of living as our true selves, of loving openly without shame or fear, and if we're not caught, then we'll build something beautiful together. I said, something that proves love is stronger than law, that human dignity cannot be legislated away. As we settled into our bedrolls under a canopy of winter stars, I understood that we had crossed a threshold from which there was no return. The woman who had been paraded at the altar was gone forever, replaced by someone brave enough to vanish into the night with her slave toward whatever freedom they could find or create. The mountains ahead promised both sanctuary and new challenges, but they also promised the possibility of a life built on truth rather than lies, love rather than duty, choice rather than obligation. Tomorrow we would continue our journey toward an uncertain but authentic future, guided by nothing but our commitment to each other and our faith that somewhere in the wide world there had to be room for love that refused to accept artificial boundaries. The Blue Ridge Mountains welcomed us with their ancient silence and misty valleys that seemed to exist outside the normal boundaries of civilization. Here among peaks that had watched over countless generations of fugitives and outcasts, we began to hope that we might actually find the sanctuary we desperately sought. Our first glimpse of what freedom might look like came in the form of a settlement called Haven's Rest, a community of perhaps 40 families who had chosen isolation over conformity, their cabins scattered through a remote valley accessible only by paths known to local guides. You folks lost? Asked a bearded man who emerged from the trees as we approached the settlement, his rifle held casually but ready for use if we proved threatening. Not lost, Marcus replied carefully, looking for a place where people mind their own business and judge by character rather than circumstance. That depends, the man said, studying us with sharp eyes, on what kind of character you're bringing to our valley. The kind that works hard, keeps promises, and believes all people deserve to live according to their own choices. I said, meeting his gaze directly. Fair enough, he replied with a slight smile. I'm Samuel Crawford, unofficial mayor of this unofficial town, and you're welcome to stay as long as you cause no trouble and pull your own weight. Pull your own weight. The simple expectation that had replaced the complex social calculations of my former world. Here worth was measured by contribution rather than inheritance, character rather than connections. The cabin we were offered was small but sturdy, built by previous residents who had moved on to other destinations. It contained the basic necessities for mountain living along with tools and supplies left behind by people who understood the needs of newcomers. Most folks who come here are running from something, explained Sarah Crawford, Samuel's wife, as she helped us settle into our new home. We don't ask too many questions about what that something might be. What kind of things? I asked, curious about our fellow refugees, debt, bad marriages, family feuds, trouble with the law. Sometimes people who just couldn't fit into regular society for one reason or another. Sarah replied, we've got former slaves, poor whites, immigrants, even a few folks who used to be wealthy before they lost everything. Former slaves and former wealthy. People from opposite ends of the social spectrum finding common ground in their rejection of a system that had failed them all. The community represented a radical experiment in human equality. The rule here is simple, Sarah continued. Whatever you were before doesn't matter. What matters is who you choose to be now, who you choose to be now. The freedom to define ourselves rather than being defined by circumstances of birth or social expectations. It was exactly what Marcus and I had been seeking. Our first weeks in Haven's Rest were spent learning the skills necessary for mountain survival. Marcus's carpentry abilities made him immediately valuable for construction and repair projects. While I discovered talents I never knew I possessed, you've got a natural gift for healing, observed Martha Henley, an elderly woman who served as the community's unofficial doctor. Your hands seem to know instinctively how to comfort people. In pain, healing, caring for others. Using my hands to create comfort rather than simply to display wealth through decorative needlework. The work felt meaningful in ways that my previous life had never achieved. The community's acceptance of our relationship was matter of fact rather than remarkable. Here, a white woman and black man living together as husband and wife attracted no more attention than any other partnership based on love and mutual respect. Love is love, Samuel Crawford said when I thanked him for the community's tolerance. Seen enough hatred and cruelty in my time to recognize something good when it shows up. Something good. The simple recognition that our love was a positive force rather than a dangerous aberration. Validation from people who had learned to value substance over appearance. Winter deepened into its harshest months. But our isolation also provided perfect protection from the outside world. No bounty hunters or slave catchers would brave mountain snows and treacherous paths to search for fugitives who might not even exist. You think they've given up looking? Marcus asked as we sat by our fire one February evening, the wind howling outside our cabin. I think they've realized that dead fugitives are less valuable than live ones, I replied. And these mountains have a reputation for swallowing people who don't belong here. And we belong here. We belong wherever we choose to build a life together, I said with conviction, but this feels more like home than anywhere I've ever lived. Home. The concept had new meaning when applied to a place we had chosen rather than inherited, where we were valued for our contributions rather than tolerated for our connection. Spring brought news from the outside world through traders and travelers who risked the mountain paths. Reports that the search for Victoria Ashworth and her escaped slave had been officially abandoned after months without leads. They're saying you must have died in the mountains, reported a trader who had known me in my previous life. Your family held a memorial service, very touching, lots of tears, dead to my old world, reborn in a new one where I could live according to my own values rather than performing roles assigned by others. The transformation felt complete and irreversible. Are you sad? Marcus asked that night. Knowing that your family believes you're dead, I'm sad for their grief, I replied honestly. But not sad about the choice that caused it. The Victoria they're mourning never really existed anyway. What do you mean? She was a character I played to meet their expectations, I explained. Beautiful and obedient and ornamental. Everything a Southern belle was supposed to be, but nothing that reflected who I actually was inside. And who are you inside? I'm a woman who believes people should be free to love whom they choose. I said, who thinks human dignity is more important than social status? Who would rather live honestly in a mountain cabin than dishonestly in a mansion, even if it means giving up wealth and comfort? Especially then, I replied, because wealth and comfort that depend on other people's suffering aren't really worth having. Our first spring in Haven's Rest brought opportunities to expand our roles in the community. Marcus was elected to help plan construction of a new schoolhouse while I was asked to assist with establishing a clinic for treating injuries and illnesses. We need someone with education and gentle hands, Martha Henley explained when she offered me the position. Someone who can read medical texts and learn proper procedures. Medical texts. Proper procedures, the chance to use my education for healing rather than mere social display. The work gave purpose to skills I had thought were purely ornamental. The schoolhouse project revealed Marcus's talents as both craftsman and leader. His careful planning and attention to detail, earning respect from men who had initially been skeptical about his abilities, never seen joints fit so perfectly, admitted Tom Bradley, a former plantation overseer who had fled to the mountains after being dismissed for refusing to whip slaves. You've got a real gift for building things that last, Marcus repeated that evening with satisfaction. Better than maintaining things that belong to someone else. Much better, I agreed. Creating something permanent instead of just preserving someone else's property. As summer arrived, we received an unexpected visitor, a well-dressed man who claimed to be a journalist writing about mountain communities, but whose questions suggested other interests. I'm particularly interested in stories of people who've reinvented themselves, he said during dinner at the Crawford house. Folks who've left their old lives behind to start fresh, lots of those stories up here. Samuel replied cautiously, but most folks prefer to keep their past private. Of course. The visitor agreed, though I did hear rumors about a young woman who disappeared from a wealthy Virginia family. Some say she might have fled to these mountains. The silence that followed his words was pregnant with tension. Everyone in the room understanding that our sanctuary might have been discovered by someone with hostile intentions. Rumors are like mountain mists. I said calmly, they appear and disappear without leaving much trace behind. Indeed, the visitor replied, studying my face intently. Though some mists reveal interesting landscapes when they clear. That night, Marcus and I discussed the implications of the stranger's visit. The possibility that our peaceful existence was about to be shattered by forces from our abandoned past. He knows who you are, Marcus said with certainty. The question is what he plans to do with that knowledge. That depends on whether he's a journalist or a bounty hunter, I replied. And whether the community will protect us if he proves dangerous. The answer came the next morning when Samuel Crawford knocked on our door with news that the visitor had departed during the night. Apparently satisfied that his inquiries had yielded nothing worthwhile. Told him that mountain folk don't take kindly to strangers asking too many questions about their neighbors. Samuel explained with a grin, suggested he might want to continue his research elsewhere, and he left, packed up and rode out before dawn. Samuel confirmed. Doubt we'll see him again. The incident reminded us that our freedom depended not just on our own courage, but on the protection of people who had chosen to value our contributions over our origins. The community had become our family in ways that blood relations never had. We should have a ceremony, suggested Sarah Crawford a few weeks later. A proper wedding to celebrate what you two have built together. A proper wedding. The chance to make public vows based on love rather than obligation. To celebrate our choice to build a life together rather than submit to arrangements made by others. Would the community accept such a ceremony? I asked. A marriage between people of different races. Love is love. Samuel repeated his earlier wisdom, and you've proven your commitment to each other and to this community. Seems to me that deserves recognition. The wedding took place on a warm July evening in the meadow beside the new schoolhouse, witnessed by the entire community and blessed by a minister who had himself fled to the mountains after being expelled from his church for preaching equality. Do you, Marcus, take Victoria to be your wife? The minister asked, promising to love and honor her as an equal partner in all things. I do, Marcus replied, his voice strong and clear. I take her as my equal, my partner, my dearest friend. Do you, Victoria, take Marcus to be your husband, promising to love and honor him as an equal partner in all things? I do, I said with joy. I take him as my equal, my partner, my beloved companion, by the power vested in me by God's love and this community's blessing. The minister declared, I pronounce you husband and wife. May your union be a beacon of hope for all who believe in love's power to overcome injustice. The kiss that sealed our marriage was sweet with the taste of freedom finally achieved. Surrounded by people who had chosen to see us as we truly were rather than as the society expected us to be, to Marcus and Victoria. Samuel Crawford toasted as the celebration continued into the night, who remind us that courage and love can triumph over any obstacle. To courage and love, the community responded, raising their glasses in salute to principles they all embodied in different ways. 2 years later, we welcomed our first child. A daughter whose birth was celebrated by the entire community as proof that love could create new life, even in the most challenging circumstances. She's beautiful, Martha Henley said as she helped deliver our baby, perfect in every way, a true child of freedom, a child of freedom. Born to parents who had chosen each other despite every barrier society tried to place between them. Raised in a community that valued character over color, love over law. What will you name her? Asked Sarah. Crawford, as the women of Heaven's Rest gathered to welcome our daughter, Hope, I said without hesitation. Because she represents everything we hoped for when we chose love over security, Hope Crawford Williams. Marcus added, giving her a surname that combined both our chosen names. Citizen of Haven's Rest, daughter of the mountains, as I held our daughter in the cabin we had built with our own hands, surrounded by friends who had become family. I reflected on the journey that had brought us from a plantation in Virginia to a mountain valley where love was the only law that mattered. The mistress who had been paraded at the altar to wed a millionaire was gone forever, vanished into the night with her slave toward a freedom more complete than either had dared to imagine. We had found our different world, built it with our own labor and sustained it with our own courage, proved that love really could triumph over the artificial boundaries that divided human beings from their common humanity. The woman who had once worn silk and lace to impress wealthy strangers now wore simple wool and felt more beautiful than ever before. Valued for her healing hands and loving heart rather than her decorative appearance, Marcus had transformed from property to partner, from servant to craftsman, from someone who maintained other people's belongings to someone who created lasting beauty with his own vision and skill. Our daughter would grow up in a world where her parents' love was celebrated rather than criminalized, where her worth would be measured by her character rather than determined by her parentage, where she could choose her own path rather than accepting roles assigned by others. Do you ever wonder? Marcus asked one evening as we watched Hope take her first steps in the meadow where we had been married. What would have happened if you had gone through with that wedding? I try not to, I replied, but sometimes I imagine myself trapped in a gilded cage, performing the role of dutiful wife while my heart died a little more each day. And now, I wake up every morning knowing that I chose this life rather than having it chosen for me. I said that I'm living as my authentic self rather than playing a character written by other people. No regrets. Only one, I said, taking his hand as our daughter laughed with delight at her newfound mobility. That it took me so long to find the courage to choose love over everything else. As the sun set behind the mountains that had given us sanctuary, I understood that we had achieved something rare and precious, a life built on truth rather than lies, love rather than obligation, choice rather than circumstance. The mistress had vanished into the night with her slave, but what they had become was far more beautiful than what they had left behind. Proof that freedom was not just the absence of chains but the presence of love, community, and the courage to live according to one's deepest convictions. We were Marcus and Victoria now, husband and wife, parents and healers, builders and dreamers, citizens of a community that had taught us that home was not a place you inherited, but a place you created with the people you chose to love. The mountains kept our secrets and sheltered our dreams, and in their ancient shadows we had found something worth more than all the wealth and status we had abandoned. We had found ourselves and each other and the possibility of raising our daughter in a world where love mattered more than law. Our story had become part of the larger story of people who refused to accept that artificial barriers were permanent, who proved that courage and love could overcome any obstacle when backed by determination and sustained by community. The altar where I had been expected to wed a millionaire remained empty, but the life I had chosen to build with Marcus was full, beyond measure, rich with purpose and meaning and the daily miracle of waking up free.